what moment did you decide to bring some of those stories back to life?
The McDuffie case, where a black man on a motorcycle and late at night was speeding. Police tried to stop him, and more cops got involved in the chase, and it ended up with 12 cops in one chase. And they finally caught up to him, and he was beat to death by the police. It was wrong what the cops did, and I was shocked that they were acquitted in trial. It was a shock. At least 4 of them deserved to go to prison. And as a matter of fact, I arrested them.
Drugs are probably the main cause of
A lot.
Of a lot.
Yeah.
Shouldn't that be legalized? What best advice you give the young generation?
Don't be a follower, be a many things that the media didn't cover, and even the professionals didn't cover, that needed to be told to the public. So I wrote my story in nonfiction form because it was so complicated, and the legal issues were so complicated. And that's when Edna said to me, "You should write it in fiction form so that you don't have any legal problems. You just alter some scenes, alter your characters, things like that." And she was a pretty successful gal. And so I listened to her and started studying how to write a book, and started reading fiction books, John Grisham, among many others, to not just enjoy the books, but also get a handle on how they're structured. So here we are.
That is absolutely wonderful. I have a surprise for you.
Oh, well,
that's the first edition that came in by Alan. It's not existing anymore. It's coming under a new release. But I got this as a rare edition signed by you. I got it on the Amazon. I don't think it's available anymore, but
it shouldn't be available in hard copy, or that issue was issued in 2001, I think. Mm-hmm. And it should not be available anymore.
It's just a wonderful book. I went 2 times to it, or 3 times. In fact, much more, because we got busy with the screenplay after that.
There's a little story behind the title of the book. It takes about 1 minute to tell, and that when it first came out, and I was sitting in Barnes and Noble as a new author with a new book, and I had a stack of them on the table. It was 9 a.m. They opened the doors to Barnes and Noble, and I was real proud of my book. And this first guy walks up to me. He picks up the book, and I thought, well, I got my first sale. He picks up the book and said, "Wow, is this about the rock group?" And I said,
that has got an impact.
What rock group? I never heard of Dire Straits as a rock group. So yeah, how I'm living under a tree or something. Anyway, so I started realizing that I should check out titles before I put them in final form. It was a nice story. The guy who was right there, and he laughed along with me. He thought it was funny that I never heard of Dire Straits as a rock group. I'm really not much on going to rock concerts or listening to rock radio, and my upbringing is classical, and that's what I know the most about. So I'm definitely not a Dire Straits guy when it comes to the rock group.
Yeah, they were thinking about Mark Knopfler at the time.
Mark
It's a
Knopfler.
yeah. Mark Knopfler was the guitarist on Dire Straits, but the name just drew a lot of people. It's just a fantastic name. Once you think about those cases, and once you want to write a book about something like this, whatever happened in Coco Plum, in Miami, that fantastic massacre, that news that went all over the world,
Yeah.
and then you went to write a book about that. During the writing, did anything come back to you as a new discovery? Although the file was closed and everything was done, did anything come back right after while writing the book?
One of the biggest revelations that came to me, and I tried to impart that into the story, which now had fictional characters that based on true stories, was that the community had made this out to be a racial crime, and that the officers that were participating in this beating of this man were obviously racist. Of course, right now this is a good time to talk about that anyway. So they were racist, and the chief prosecutor in this case was Janet Reno. You might remember Janet Reno as the Attorney General of the United States. This is before she became Attorney General, and Janet Reno and I, being the head investigator, were invited to a number of meetings, town hall type meetings, to discuss the case, what was going to happen. And it came to me that this was not a racially oriented crime. This was just a bunch of cops who got wound up with their adrenaline over a period of like 12 minutes in a chase, which is a long time for inner city chase. Inner city chase is a big difference in highway chases. And that when they stopped him in the dark in the corner of a street, and the cops all bailing out of their cars with their sticks in their hand, they start whopping on this poor guy. They didn't know he was black. It wasn't because he was black. So I tried to bring that out, how the community made a racial issue out of it, when in fact, if the guy was white, the same thing would have happened, because he was covered. He was covered with a helmet. He had gloves on, and it was dark. And when the cops got done with the chase, when they screeched to a halt after 8 minutes, they weren't looking for a black guy or a white guy. They didn't even know what the guy was. Of course, it didn't take long to find it out once they, lost their control. But it didn't start out as a racist crime. I'll stand by that the rest of my life. And I try to impart that into the story. It was wrong what the cops did, and I was shocked that they were acquitted in trial. It was a shock. At least 4 of them deserved to go to prison. And as a matter of fact, I arrested them.
And they have to make up, even the jargon is different. It is so natural. Once you read that, you just fall in love. First pages you're in is a page turner.
That's quite
all of them. I'm not talking about only Dire Straits, but all of your crime stories. Unbelievable.
You're talking me into writing a new book.
I am. I asked you, remember, many, many times. I said that's a big encouragement for me. It's a pleasure to read the new one.
Right now, I'm writing a book on violin music.
There you go.
A whole series of intermediate difficulty pieces for the young student. Anyway, I'm having a good time doing that.
Let's do some time travel. And you ended up in police academy and having a career all your life.
Yeah.
And it switched at the moment where you dedicated yourself to being an entertainer. You were a dancer, but mainly you studied very hard playing the violin.
Yeah.
And you wanted to be in concerts and all. So something drastically changed. Was that because of job, need of a job at a time, or how did it happen? Can you take us from your childhood, and how did you get into the music, and after the music to the police academy?
That's pretty easy. I never knew my father. My father died when I was an infant. He was a Broadway and vaudeville star. he was a first, had the headlines on the marquee kind of guy. He was there with Milton Berle and Bob Hope and a lot of the others that came up through vaudeville in the early 30s and mid 30s. And he was a comic. He would put on old man makeup, and my mother married him, and she was a dancer. She had also been a concert pianist, and so I lived in a creative home, where there was music all the time, and then my mother got remarried after my father died, and she remarried into the mob. All right, because she was a showgirl in the nightclubs in Queens, and the gangsters who were not eligible to go to war, because the war was starting up then. Gangsters never really had a chance to go to war because they would buy their way out of it. So music was a big part of my life, mainly attributed to my mom, and I had a very serious teacher from Italy. So it was all the markings of being raised in music. When I got into my early teens, I had some problems in school with bullies, and because most of the guys were football players and basketball players and boxers and things like that, and I played the violin in the orchestra, and some of it was pretty serious, but I tried to ignore it, but it did have an effect on me, and I wanted to learn how to box. I wanted to learn how to play football. The first time I ever played football and did a scrimmage in my high school, the quarterback, very first play, quarterback had his hands under my butt, and he said, "Hike." That's the last thing I remember, because the center in front of me hit me with his elbow and knocked me out. And so that ended my football career. Once hike of the ball. That's all it took. And then it got more difficult. And later on towards the end of my teens, I had a girlfriend. She got pregnant, and she was beautiful, and I had to get a real job. The jobs I had were on and off with violin. I did strolling violin stuff. I played in the orchestras and things like that, but that was money one day and no money the next day kind of thing. And so I had to get a real job, and I went to my stepfather. My mother was married to her third marriage, and I was a bookmaker. And so he kind of liked me because the son he never had, And I said, "Bernie," I said, "I needed a job. Do you know anybody can get me a job? That he's going to have a baby pretty soon." And he looked at me with his New York accent. And he said, "I'll tell you what, Marsh, you're going to be a cop." And I said, "A what? Me, a cop? You got to be kidding me." And no, I said, "That would never work. I wasn't the macho type." And don't worry about it. I said, "They won't hire me." "Yeah, they will." "How do you know?" "I got connections." So he did have connections. And a month later, I was in the police academy as a 21-year-old new recruit for the police department in Miami-Dade, then it was Dade Sheriff's Department. And it was a job that I just had to have. It wasn't because I ever wanted to be a policeman. And so that was how I got to be an officer, And what I found was that I had kind of a flair for writing. I could write police reports faster than the other guys, and they all wanted me to write their reports for them all the time because I was pretty good at it. And so the career took off a little bit, although it was my intention to quit and go back to serious music. I didn't like being a policeman. It wasn't me. And so then one day I got a phone call from the chief of detectives, and he said, "How would you like to work homicide?" Homicide in a big police department is like in the Army, you want to be a Green Beret. And I said, "Homicide? Me? Homicide?" And short story long story short, I was put in homicide, and I stayed in homicide for almost the rest of my career. As an officer, as a detective, as a lieutenant, as a captain, that became my career.
Yeah, you later on completed your studies and you became a criminal justice graduate. My daughter, as I told you,
Yeah,
same
right. Yes.
same thing. It's very proud. Um, and that brought you to the high position actually in the area.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I had to take a test and I passed it. But that became a career. I never wanted to be a policeman as a career, but the 30 years just clicked by, and I ended up being called to Washington to testify to a panel of senators about the problems with crime in America. We're talking about 1980 here, and what about crime in America and my views on what should be done and not done. So that was a compliment to be invited that way, and so I don't know. I stuck to it. And then the financial implications were that if I stick around for 30 years, I'll have a nice pension. So here I am today.
But you're still playing violin. And
Oh,
you're still playing with a buddy of yours. I read somewhere.
my buddy has moved to Texas.
So you can't do it anymore.
Not with him, but
Not with him.
he and I became best friends for like 16, 17 years. He's a medical examiner, the autopsy guy, and he had a tremendous ear for music. And
piano player.
He was a pianist, a great pianist. Yeah. And he could play anything by ear. And I was pretty good at playing by ear as well. And so he and I could play whether it was Chopin or Beethoven or
yeah,
or something more current. Because music in general was just a gift that we both had. We enjoyed it. Right.
Yeah, I've read this in your book, From Violence to Violence.
Yeah.
Your life stories there's memoir.
Yes.
And it reads like a novel. There's another film that should be made. It is unbelievable. I mean, your life has been a carousel of happenings, of adventure and everything else. It's you got shot in the line of duty, right?
Yeah, I got shot in the leg by a woman. I'm the only cop in Miami's history that got shot by a woman. But yeah.
How did it happen?
We had warrants. I was working in the warrants bureau. This is before I worked homicide. And we came to work one day, and the captain said, this guy's wanted for auto theft in New York City. And we have his address. We know where he's at. Go arrest him. So his background was he was not violent. So we just went to the second story of an apartment house in Miami, beat on the door, and this woman opened it, and she said, "What do you want?" And I said, "Well, so-and-so, and we have a warrant for his arrest." So she tried to close the door, didn't work. My partner and I forced our ways in. I started looking behind doors, and so did my partner down the hall. And then all of a sudden I hear bang. And at first I didn't know I was shot. But I saw her waving a rifle at me. And she was screaming bloody murder.
With a rifle.
Rifle. She was screaming like out of control. This was her. She was a 38-year-old woman, and her boyfriend was 22. That answer any questions. So she didn't want to lose her stud. And so my partner and I ended up arresting, took control of her. I went to the hospital, spent a couple of days in the hospital. I was fine. It was through and through wound. I didn't have a serious injury, but it could have been very serious because the way she was waving that rifle around, the muzzle, just raised the muzzle about a half inch and it would have gone through my heart.
Unbelievable. You look at today's happenings with police in the street and all the commotion and all. Policemen are different than when it was like 20 years ago or 10 years ago.
Actually,
it seems to me that the order has to be kept no matter what. It's abolishing police is not an answer.
I think police officers in general are some of the most wonderful human beings on planet Earth. And these are the people that run into violence. They don't shun violence. So the cops are here to protect you, and you can go on your way, but the cops have to be there and face the violence. And once in a while, a cop will either make a mistake, an unintentional mistake, or he just lose it because it gets so so sensitive, so much going on, and some people can't handle more than one thing at a time. And but I say that 99% of the police officers that work in this country are fine people, and they do the job well. Once in a while, a guy will come along, he'll screw up, and the officers
And it reflects on everybody.
it reflects on everybody.
Yeah.
And there are certain organizations that want to take any incident at all that doesn't look right from police and make it bigger than it has to be. So anyway, I've arrested officers. You know, it wasn't a fun thing to do, but it was one of those things that someone had to do it.
Well, you've been through so many tragedies, and you've seen. I think I read somewhere a lady got indicted, and after years and years got out, and all that.
I can remember a couple of big arguments that I had with fellow officers, fellow detectives, who thought it was the most important thing was close the case. And I told my answer was always, it's not to close the case, it's to secure justice. So that if somebody is innocent, we don't just lock them up because we want to close the case. And there were probably a half a dozen times in my career where I unlocked the handcuffs and I sent somebody home, or I felt like I worked on behalf of justice by finding out that the person that we thought was guilty of a murder, it wasn't him. And there was one in particular where a girl was found strangled under a tree, and it was at night, and the bus driver dropped her off, and we followed this all up. She was a pretty black girl, and we found a chunk of something on her leg because she's laying under a tree and she had been covered with a blanket, and something on her leg. And the lab people said it looks like a fingernail. Looks like a fingernail gouge. If you get your suspect, that'd be your man. So we got the bus driver in, and we interviewing the bus driver, and sure enough, on his thumb he has a piece gouged out of his nail, just like what was on her leg. And the crime lab said, book him, that's your man. And I asked the lab, I said, can you prove that is human material? And he went out to the laboratory in the University of Miami and found out it was a fish scale.
Any of those things really got you emotionally involved, or you kept emotions out of?
Honestly, the most emotional moments of my career was having to come to a house and tell a mother that your son is dead. That happened to my mother. My brother drowned in New York, in Flushing, New York. My brother drowned, he was 7 years old, and it wrecked my mother. And that was 1942. But nevertheless, I had the responsibility, probably more than a couple hundred times, of knocking on a door, having to tell somebody that their loved one is gone. That's not easy.
That's the hardest thing.
That is probably the hardest thing I think I've ever had to do.
Devastating. Are you afraid of anything?
Yeah, I'm afraid of suffering. If I die, I want to die instantly. All right, I don't want to suffer. I don't want my wife to suffer. I don't want my loved ones to suffer. The suffering is the worst thing. You know, being dead, I can handle that. But
are you afraid of that?
I'm afraid of death? No.
Death itself.
Yeah, well, I'd like to stick around a little longer, but
well, you will. There's not But even if we live 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years, the moment will come.
Yeah.
Because we don't live forever. Saddest moment in your life?
Say what? Saddest moment?
Saddest moment.
Well, I had to take. They didn't have hospice back in 1966. And my mother, who was a vibrant woman, still age 55, and she was tap dancing every day, with students and things like that. And she had been a beautiful showgirl. And she got sick with brain tumors. And I had a job. I had to be somewhere at a certain time every day and do the job like the other guys had to do. But there was nobody to take care of her because her husband, the bookie, he was also in the hospital and he was dying of heart failure. So both parents were in the same hospital, different floors. And my mother came home for a while. They did a surgery on her. They took the tumor out, realized it was malignant, sewed her back up, and then told me she'll have about 6 months. And that's just about what it took for her to die. And I was with her every day.
Did she go through chemo and through all that and
No,
radiation? No,
there
not really.
there was no reason to do that because she was gone, and it was sad because I saw this vibrant woman just diminish into just a hulk of sadness. And she got to the point where she knew she was sick, but she began to not recognize me and things like that. So, the regression when you take care of someone who's dying, it's not easy. It's not something you can just delegate to somebody else. And I love my mother a lot. She was my queen.
Yeah, likewise.
You know what I'm talking about.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. A secret talent that we do not know about.
I think in terms of manhood, I was about as ordinary as anybody else. I had an ability to memorize things very well. But in my day, had there been a Jeopardy television program, I probably would have done pretty good. I was fascinated with many things. I memorized statistics like crazy. I can still tell you the case numbers of cases that I worked in 1960. I don't know why. I mean, it's just a knack I have for that. But I mean, it isn't because I'm trying to impress anybody. It's just there. And but that's starting to fade a little bit. But 81 years old, that's probably normal. So I'm not worried about it. No,
You're very active. You feel well. You play music. You go outside and.
Yeah. So I'm happy to be here. I'm glad I'm lasting a while. I'm glad I have a good wife.
Oh, you will for a long time. What's the greatest satisfaction?
I don't know if you saw my book, A Boy Who Mattered. That's a nonfiction book.
I was going to get to that. Yeah.
Okay. That's my son, and it's a real long story, but it's not to this, which it wouldn't be appropriate. But one of the things that happened because my son was a diehard drug addict, and he had a weak constitution. He wasn't a dangerous person in terms like he wouldn't rob you or hurt you for drugs, but he had low self-worth. Much more to the story than that, but he had low self-worth, and all the times we tried to help him, he would reject the help. I even bought him a house once, and he turned it into a drug house. So it just wasn't meant to be. His son and his daughter are Jason and Lacey, and when they were 8, 9, and 10 years old, it was a terrible life that they had to live with their father being neglectful and their mother being abusive. This is what parents that these two kids had. So one day I was on the phone with Jason. He was 10, and he's living now in the islands of Hawaii. And I called him up. I said, "It's your birthday. How'd you like to come visit us here?" And he answered me, "I didn't want to visit you. I'm coming to live with you because my mother doesn't want me." I probably shed more tears over that than anything else in my life. These poor kids, and they're so bright. They were so intelligent, so good looking. And all they wanted to do was be happy. So my wife was are you listening? My 5th wife. Suzanne is my 5th wife. We're together now 34 years. But anyway, I said to her, I said, "Jason wants to come live with us because his mother doesn't want him." She said, "So bring him on." And she wasn't really related to Jason. And
Yeah.
the next year we had his sister living with us too. So that was one of the biggest emotional bridges we had to cross.
Fantastic. He was a poet.
Did you get it?
He wrote poetry.
Yeah,
Very, very good.
yeah. A lot of heart.
Very deep. Yeah.
Very, very deep. Right. I got those poems out of his trash. They were all crumpled up in spiral notebooks and just bags of garbage bags, and loosely, like he was going to throw them away. And as I said, I want them. So this is when he was still like misbehaving. So I gathered them all together. I think there was about 100, 150, and ironed them out so I could read them. And I typed them up, put them in a book, and got it published. And he was so happy. We gave him. He didn't know I was doing that. He was figure in his early 50s, and we sat him down for a lunch. And I said, "Here, Bennett, you're now a published author." And he couldn't get over it.
They should be. I don't know if they are, but if not, they should be illustrated.
Yeah, I never thought about that.
In a special edition.
Oh.
Yeah, there's some of us, myself included. We think I wrote poetry in my life, and I put it aside. I thought it was for girls. Guys were playing with toffee and all that and all macho stuff, and I felt ashamed to tell them that I write poetry. You immortalized him.
It made him feel like it was worthwhile.
It was worth. Absolutely. He was an artist, but sometimes life is controlling us. We cannot control it. What best advice you give the young generation?
Don't be a follower, be a leader, and be in control of who and what you are. Don't let others control who and what you are. That's broad. That's a broad statement, but it boils down to that. And a lot of these young people, they're so amenable to being taken in, and when they get shown some kind of attention, they'll do anything because they want to be wanted and liked. What comes to mind are gangs. We think of gangs as criminals maybe, or out of control, anti-Americans and whatever. But truth is, most of the gang members that we have in our streets, whether it's Chicago or LA or here or whatever, most of the gang members are youngsters, mostly boys, who didn't get any attention when they were kids because mommy was busy having children. All right. And it became like something that you can go forward with, you can survive in your life if you have a number of kids, because of the social requirements that will be there to support you. And what happens then is the 13-year-old who's never really had any hugs and kisses and love and tenderness, everything's been shouting and screaming and everybody's so tight. And all the 12 and 13-year-old wants to do is get out of the house. And along comes Sammy, and Sammy, who's 18 years old, and Sammy says, "Why don't you join our club? Join our gang?" That becomes his family. That's why all these gang members join gangs, because that becomes the family they never had at home.
Especially if they show them some money and they entice them with that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
This is all for money. And what they really get is the attention that they didn't get at home.
Drugs are probably the main cause of
a lot. Yeah.
Shouldn't that be legalized?
Yeah, I've written about that, and I do think that we're not helping people by putting them in prisons for the rest of their life or a good part of their life. I kind of like the European model of criminal justice in some ways. The European model is we will sentence you to less time like you would be in America. You're not going to get 30 years or 20 years. You're going to get 3 years, 4 years. But in that time, you're going to be given schooling on skills so that when you walk out the door of the prison, you are capable of supporting yourself and your own family. And I think that is a much better way to look at it, especially drugs. I mean, we've had so many people go to drugs and they spend almost their entire life in prison because they were big sellers of drugs or importers of drugs, things like that. Or the users become just sad victims of their own selves because they're the ones that are they're condemned by the buyers and the sellers and the business people who don't go to jail.
Denmark has legalized drugs a long time ago. I mean,
Yeah.
you go and buy them off the counter.
Right.
And there are no arrests at the border, and there's no traffic, no drug traffic, and no shooting, no anything like that. And I advise the people to read From Violence to Violence. It's a fantastic book. And it's got everything, and it's got love, it's got everything, it's got adventure. Yeah, absolutely everything. You know, it's a James Bond type of story. Only that is much more. It's got romanticism in it. It's got everything. It's got crime, mafia. It's you know, all the drugs and everything. All the police stories, crime stories, and coverings that were not. I mean, people don't even think. They look at a police car and they say, you know, that's a job. What's behind that and what they go through? And I always wondered. You're the first friend that I have in the police academy. I say police academy, police force.
I'll tell
What's behind one's mind and what experience they have, what type of emotions they go through? Because it's not. You've been through CSI, I believe, 16 years or something, working as a CSI, right?
Yeah. You know, CSI was charged of CSI for 4 years, and that I blended that into my 16 years in homicide. And
16 years in homicide, right? Yeah. And that was such an experience. I mean, just by watching, you know, those series on television, and they show as much as they could show. What's really behind someone's, you know, what kind of heart you take home when your day is finished, actually, and you go home.
In some of the books I've written about the justice system and police conduct and things like that, I do make a point of saying that it, although in today's world we see these incidents on TV all the time in the news media, then the riots that happen and all this stuff, but there is less of a problem of officers going off the rail today than there was 10 or 20 years ago. The cops today are much more docile, but they have to sometimes respond to something that they step into. They walk in a door and someone fires a gun at them. And you have to do something. And they're walking into trouble all the time. And when the trouble happens, sometimes the cop gets hurt. Sometimes the cop makes a mistake and shoots the wrong person, and he'll get punished for that.
Are you for the Second Amendment?
I think it should be modified. I think that should be modified. I don't think we need to have families that have AR-15s in them and things like that. But I'm all for having something in the house that you can defend yourself with if the ever happens. I have 2 guns. I have one I keep in my car, just a handgun, revolver, and I have one that I keep in the house. So if there's any bad noises or some bad guys that come around, I can protect. At least I have something to protect myself with. So I think that in that context, the Second Amendment is needed. All right, but there's always extremes. You know, there's the people that want to totally do away with the Second Amendment constantly, or there's other people that want to have, you know, cannons in their house if they want them. You know, so where can we get somewhere in the middle and still have the Second Amendment and be useful? But I think the way it is right now, it needs to be improved upon.
Firearms. Interesting. They were written. The Second Amendment was written at a time when you could bear that.
There was only one. Guns only had one bullet, not even a bullet. It had a long finger.
Yeah, you have to. Yeah.
and that's all they had, you know. So it's a different time, it's a different era, you know. The death penalty. I've written often about doing away with the death penalty. We should absolutely do away with the death penalty. How do you know you're not? If only 1 out of 1,000 are executed in it, and that is innocent, that's one too many. I'm very adamant about the death penalty. I mean, prison is pretty bad. There's a lot of prisoners that want the death penalty. I've known some.
I mean, not going. I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm not going to the extremes. Actually, like in Switzerland, Sweden, where the maximum penalty, no matter how many people you kill, is 8 years.
Yeah, well, that's
not that, but rehabilitation. I don't know if it works. Something in the brain triggers and gives them the satisfaction. Some they have satisfaction for him. Some were kids which were maybe violently treated by parents, or no matter what the cause is, the effect is devastating. And you have people out of prison today that they put them out and they go and commit crimes. It's the same. Prison is nothing but a school.
Yeah,
and that's that's the problem. How do you see this?
I think that prisons could be better used than they're used to. It's a warehouse for human beings.
Do you think they should be? Do you think they should be private?
No, definitely not. Matter of fact, the private prisons that they have here, there's about 10% of the prisons are private prisons, and if they're not accountable enough to doing the right things behind bars, you know, making sure that the right amount of food, the quality of the food, the medical care, you know, because once someone becomes a prisoner, they belong to the state. That human being now is dependent upon the prison system to be healthy or get well if you're sick, get fed food and things like that, and in some cases maybe even some education. So I don't know. I think if somebody
it works if they're not psychopaths, but once something is deranged in the mind, and that's hard to it's not hard to prove, but hard to accept by so that they put them in prison for longest time. Sometimes I heard judges are prone to give maximum to keep them longer in prison because companies are, you know, they labor. Excuse me.
That's if they're elected. Because when they're elected, they have to show that they're tough on crime. All right, and to show they're tough on crime means they get the maximum penalties. And then when the election time comes, they have the banner: Joe Schmo, Judge Schmo, very tough on criminals, and people like to hear that.
I thought the big companies are hiring inmates at the lowest possible wages, and they pay them nothing.
Get away with it.
And this is how the private prisons also make money. That's
exactly right.
Yeah,
that's exactly right. And they're
it works. It works like lobbies. We're getting to a different thing, but lobbies are again
well, they're less accountable because once the management of those private prisons are behind the closed doors and the bars. No one is holding them to task for doing things the right way. I mean, I've had prisoners tell me that were in private prisons that they were starved to death almost because they just got very small portions of food.
Do you believe that criminals will come out better from a prison or worse?
Well, that's general saying because some criminals will say to themselves, "I never want to go back to prison again. I'm going to learn how to work and take care of myself." And other prisoners
probably a minority of it.
Yeah. I had a kid. Here's a good example. His name was Ricky Lightman. He's 31 years old. He spent most of his life in jail, even as a teenager and later on for robbery in his 20s. He did his full time. He got out of jail when he was 31 years old. Small guy, about 5'5", 5'6". I took his confession. He was very cooperative with me. It was almost as though he didn't mind prison. He had to go back. And it turns out that he admitted to killing 5 women. And one woman every week, every Saturday, he went to a house, would have a gun, and he would, when they answered the door and he knocked, he'd bring out the gun and he'd rape them at gunpoint, and then shoot. I talked to him. I wanted to know more about his motives, and he said he got out of prison finally at age 31. He couldn't get a job. No, he had no friends. He had no relatives, no job, no skills, and so finally he decided, hey, I want to go home. Home is prison. So he went home.
Yeah, well,
And he controlled that whole situation.
Would you do that? Suppose you're in prison. When you come out, do you want to do the same thing just to go back into, because you have the luxury of having food and stuff like that? Would you kill somebody? I don't think so. I think it's for the individual has an inner call. Is his personality, and something is deranged in a criminal. I really believe that. Criminals are mentally deranged. Absolutely. There's no remedy to that.
Some are.
The excuse to some are, which aren't.
Well, it's hard to tell just by looking at them. Well,
somebody committed a crime in self-defense, and they end up in prison. Obviously, they're not going to do anything again, and they're afraid to, because they don't have it in them. They're not criminals.
Every case is unique. Every case you have to take it aside and develop your opinions on that particular case and all the dynamics that went in to do that.
True, but we look at the statistics as well, right?
Yeah.
And statistics say that most of the criminals, they go out back in the street and do the same thing. Rape.
I don't know about most. Right now the prisons are over crowded, and the powers to be do what they can to let some of them go free, because they need to make room for the new ones. So it's a difficult problem to maintain these prisons, and the food and the opportunities that they have inside of prisons is just terrible. There's just nothing there. They just breathe for 2 years or 20 years, and they open the doors. Some of them are lucky enough to have family members that care about them when they get out. But most, by the time they do a long period of time, there's nobody waiting for them anymore. And you're right, they'll commit a crime just to go back in. It's hard to call everybody the same name when they really have different names, or to the degree to which they're mentally ill. Some are slightly off the kilter, some are really crazy. And so
unfortunately, they drop everybody. They dump everybody in the same institution. There should be most of them should be in mental institution. If you want to spend the tax money to try to rehabilitate these people, because they have them in them. You could see in their eyes. It's like a wild cat. You cannot give, and I use this sometimes. You cannot give a tiger onions and expect them to eat it. Or French fries. Is made for that. He is built like that. Yeah. Something snapped, either in their childhood or something like that. But even if it snaps, even if you're an abused child, I don't want to talk about me, but because I was a bit abused, and I love my father. Yeah, I love my father. So you see the reaction here on this side of the.
Okay.
I loved him. He bit me. And I make this public. It's the first time. But he bit me. He used to take his belt off, run it through water, sprinkle it with water, and to make it wet and and my back was all.
That's terrible. That's terrible.
So, and I later I was thinking, you know what? He was under pressure. He lived in bad times. You're talking about communism, came from there, and this lifestyle has an effect on people. And I pardoned him because of that. I said, you know what? He was he reacted like that because his nerves were upside down. So he had a reason. He wasn't a bad person. He loved me to death.
Yeah.
And he would have taken a bullet for me.
My boy Bennett was a good person too, but he was just a hopeless drug addict. That was his whole world, and the language and
that's an addict. That's unfortunate. But he wasn't a bad person, but very unfortunate. And Dad's been to war and all that, and I understand all that. But I was abused, and I could say, well, a trauma, because I was yelling and I was the neighbors would come in, and that trauma just could have had an impact, and I would have gone right there, pick up a gun and do something else. But I never thought about this thing. So I don't want to compare myself, because it's not about me in this show, but I just give you an example. I could give you other examples as well. But in general, there is psychic disturbance when you repeat, and when you have the pleasure. I would say most, I'm not putting everyone in it, but most of the serial killers, for example, they have a pleasure to doing that.
No, they're really sick.
You're right. So there is no reason for them, for the taxpayer to I'm sorry to say that. I mean, everybody has a right to leave. Maybe we should send them to some secluded place, their own island right there. Let them be there. Let them kill each other. They let whatever they want to do there. They'll be in primitive times. You give them no phones, no nothing. They will feel like in exactly how they are in the prime, like as primates, and then in this type of lifestyle, yeah, in the woods somewhere, out from the society, because they're pests to society.
Well, let me give you a very interesting statistic. You might this cover a lot of ground here. In 1956 or 57, the mid 50s, there were what was the number? 600,000 inmates in mental institutions in the United States. 600,000 in people that were mentally ill, incarcerated in prisons, and not prisons, but hospitals. In today's world, yeah, how many are incarcerated in mental institutions?
No idea.
50,000.
They're all in prison, taking handbags.
They decided, the Supreme Court decision came down and said that you can't hold somebody without charges against their will and put them in an institution. All right. So they opened the gates to the mental institutions in the 70s and the 80s until it whittled down to it's about 50,000 now that are in mental institutions that are totally gone. And now what we do with mentally ill people is we put them in prisons. That's why we have so many people, like 2.3 million in prison now, when we used to have like half a million. So, there's a correlation to the number of mentally ill people, and the experts have come to the conclusion that roughly 20% of all prison inmates are advanced mental illness in today's world. In America, not necessarily Europe or anyplace else. So we've done things wrong. We just maybe to save money or follow the Supreme Court rulings that might have been a little ignorant, because this isn't helping people. People who are really mentally ill should live in a mental facility for people like that. That's my opinion, anyway. I was going to do that to my son Bennett. I would put him into an institution for mentally ill without hesitating, and I know he would have got 3 meals a day, and he would watch TV or have air conditioning, and if he got any drugs, he'd probably get all the drugs he wanted. Anyway.
I don't think he was mentally ill. I think it was just addicted, and addiction is something that.
Well, it started when he was 12, when his mother said to him, she had a marijuana joint. She was a apostle, and she reached over to Bennett when he was 12, and it was lit. And she said, "Here, try this. Try this. Nothing wrong with it." and don't do this behind my back. And so he followed her instructions for life. And he writes in his poetry about his mother, about that.
Very fine. And in the meantime, he left a legacy. I mean, we learn from everything he wrote.
Yeah.
Looking at today's situation with police officers, what advice would you give them? You were a police captain.
Quit, find another occupation.
Find another what? Become a violinist.
No, I quit and find another vocation.
Yeah.
Because I'll tell you what, they are quitting. Many of them are quitting by the hundreds.
Do you see big cities or small cities, maybe because you don't have so much crime, but do you see large cities without police protection?
Well, I mean, there are some people who are trying to do it, but they have a long range purpose. What's going on behind the scenes is what we don't know all about. The press doesn't have the information. They don't tell people the truth, what's really going on behind the scenes, and the powers to be that are making these things happen. All the riots.
Well, obviously, it's an agenda, and it's grown.
The agenda is there, and
for not only from the United States, but you see this globalist agenda because it's all over the world. This happens everywhere.
That's right. And for the sake of not being called a nut, the Communist Party is behind a lot of that. Communism is the goal of the dark rooms in America right now. That's in the streets, beating people, setting cars on fire, doing all the violence, and because this is what they said they was going to do for years and years back. They said they were going to divide and conquer. This is nothing new. They're just finding the openings and the willingness to get it done has come around.
Don't you think the lobbies should be banned from interacting, because they pour millions and millions of dollars into politicians?
Right. Oh yeah, they absolutely do. They should have no influence over politicians. People should earn their positions in politics based on the decisions and the accomplishments that they do, not how much money they get put.
That's a very easy way to do it. Actually, taxes should actually be reformed, and so the Federal Reserve should be extinguished. But anyway, we're not getting into that for now. But taxes should be reformed, and we should pay taxes normally. And every citizen should pay taxes. Absolutely, I'm all for that.
Right.
And part of those taxes should probably go into a special budget that will finance candidates at presidency. So they will have exactly the same amount of money, and it will go by merit, not by influence. So once you have that, the people will finance actually
That sounds ideal. It sounds like idealism.
It's doable. It's very doable, but when I say when I say establishment, we all know what the establishment is, but they don't want it for good reason, because there's billions of dollars are pouring in and maybe trickling in certain pockets. At the end of the day, we look at corruption. Because otherwise, I mean, you have Ross Perot, who had to use his own pocket, his own money. He raised some, but he has to use his own pocket and all that. He never made it. Ron Paul, who wanted to dissolve banish the Federal Reserve and do a reform on that. And now we have this cacophony. You could see this. We're going towards that direction.
Have you ever thought about writing a book
about this?
You have a lot to offer.
The information is just, last time I wrote a book, it took me 10 years. So I'm not. By the way, how long does it take you to write a book?
It depends on the book. If
average.
The whole story is in my head.
On average, say I'm going back Dire Straits. Dire Straits is the story there just got me wound up.
I think I wrote that in about 2 months, and
You had all the data, and that's why.
Yeah, but it's all in my head. And then I did some rewriting because some publisher or editor thought there was some changes needed to be made. And but whatever, I think I've had other books. I've written nonfiction books. I've written them in like 3 weeks. But what takes a lot of time is the research. But I don't think about. And right now, I'm not much in the mood to be writing books for a while. I don't know why. I just kind of like got dried up, and I'm going back to my music a little more for the time being.
Well, that's more relaxing.
Yeah.
Well, you were into crime stories anyway, so all your stories came out from police file.
Yeah, but a lot of them weren't necessarily.
Well, that's amazing. That is amazing. But I mean, that is an advantage that you have, which is absolutely fantastic. Think of Agatha Christie. Yeah, she never had any connection with police or anything like that. She had to make up stories, right?
Yeah.
Conan Doyle the same way with Sherlock Holmes and all that. Never had any contingency, you know. With, I mean,
well, my first book, my goal was to tell the story of the McDuffie case, but in fiction form, and because Edna suggested just take your characters and your scenes and switch them around somehow. You're centered your story instead of in downtown Miami, South Dade County, instead of somebody being a white guy, make him a black guy. You know,
so you wrote a faction, which is called it's between fact and fiction.
Okay, I like that.
That's fantastic. That's like Truman. Truman Capote used this in his works,
Really?
And
okay.
it was called a non-fictional novel, because
non-fiction novel.
Non-fiction novel, because it's contradictory, but some say it's not that such things does not exist. Yes, it does, because you're using real characters, historical characters, real events, and you mix them with your into a romantic type of story, into something that will sound like you give them new. New. So that is all your books are based on truth and true events, and the advantage you have with yours being you take from the police file and rejuvenate that and revive that is absolutely how many people do have that?
Yeah, well, there's a few cops that have been successful novelists or writers of books.
Too few.
The guy, he's formerly an LA detective. That was 20 years ago, but he did a good job of writing a number of books, and I've read other police books. I taught at school for a while. I taught classes on how to write books, and I had good turnouts, and there's a number of people that were happy to tell me how many books they wrote or what books they were writing because they went to my school. So that was a popular thing.
I was looking at George W. Higgins. He took some he wrote about some mafia stories out of Boston and all that at the time of the Irish mafia, and
you ever watch The Sopranos?
But of course, but you have a special, see, this is what I'll try to tell people. It's not that you pick up your book and you read, you just another book, just another crime story. There is so much meaning and so much life and so much emotion in there, and so you could see. I mean, reading the book, you could see the events, you could see the live events, and this is what makes a book a possible film.
As you're talking, I'm cogitating what you're getting at, and I'm trying to identify what I'm doing that makes you feel that way. And the only thing I can think of is most police stories or books about law enforcement are focused on police and law enforcement. That's the focus. I feel like a lot of my focus is on the personal life of police officers and the home life and in Dire Straits, everything in the plot of Dire Straits had to do with the woman, what nickname? I gave her a nickname for what it was. The woman that went up to the bedroom when the murders were taking place downstairs, and she survived.
Yeah.
She survived, and she couldn't tell her husband that she was the girl that was upstairs. Her husband being the lead investigator of that particular murder, and she wasn't supposed to be there. So he had to balance his private life and his professional life very delicately throughout the whole story. And during that time that I was writing that particular book, I was having a lot of marital problems with my wife at the time, and she wanted more attention. And she was right. She was right to tell me she wanted more attention because I was never home. And then so my world was dedicated towards the police jobs that I had to do, which I did something well. It was, in other words, no football player was going to kick me in the butt anymore. I could actually stand up to other writers, and that meant a lot to me. But the marriage went to hell because I lost my attention to the family. A lot of that was my fault, and that's what Dire Straits is built in.
Yeah, it's got some spirit in it. It's got some voice. Unique voice of it, and it
got
captures.
A black guy who's training. That's Zeke, and he's training Zeke how to handle homicides, how to find evidence, things like that. That's responsibility. And he's got a lieutenant who is kind of an asshole, but he has to report to this lieutenant, and the lieutenant hindered him in his investigation. Then there's the really bad people, and there's the Cuban that came over from Cuba and everything else. So we have a mixed bag of all these actors, and I guess it makes, and it had a pretty decent ending, I think.
Right. Yeah, we don't want to give that away. We don't want to give that away, but
I understand.
Because we'll show the book, and I know you are saying that probably on the same level. It's a different story actually, and it's different turn of events and everything else. You've written also a wonderful, wonderful crime story, true events as well. And I'm trying to find it right here to bring it about.
The Upside to Murder.
Yes, absolutely wonderful. Absolutely wonderful.
Yeah,
absolutely wonderful. Just like Dire Straits, but that has a different. Dire Straits with a lot of drugs and all that was drug based, and the anger and the massacre, fantastic massacre there, the plush villa, which triggers a lot of adventure, and it doesn't let you. That's why it will be a movie, and that's why this doesn't let you a second off a page.
No,
it's just every single half a page will get you to the next and to the next time. You have to stay 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning until your eyes close by themselves, and you wake up with a book in your chest. So this is how good it is.
Thank you.
Now the other one as well. I don't want to discuss that too much, but because we're on Dire Straits, but the other one has absolutely an ending which will it's astounding, and
So
the upside. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think
the surprise at the end is what is striking, and the morality behind it. A lot of it's just I don't have the book with me, but we'll publish it online for everybody to see it, and we'll leave we have lines where to buy those books.
That when I write some of the most emotional scenes, emotional struggles, that I would get a lump in my throat sometimes. I would actually feel the emotions that the characters feel. And I think that helps. Maybe that comes out in the writing. I don't know.
Do you mention any one of those incidents and turned into books in your other nonfiction?
In,
Uh,
in nonfiction,
yeah,
from violins to violence.
that's the only one actually because it's your autobiography.
Yeah, yeah, and the McDuffie case, which is the black guy on the motorcycle.
Yeah. Yes.
That was an entire chapter in that book, um, and it's still it amazes me that in today's world, in today's country, people don't remember those riots that took place in the city of Miami, where 18 people were murdered for being white. Okay, 18 people were murdered the night that the not guilty verdicts came in, and in today's world, the people don't remember the Miami riots at all. They don't remember it at all. They remember Rodney King, who was beat up by cops in L.A. 10 years later. That's everybody remembers Rodney King, but no one remembers the McDuffie case, and it was a horror story.
Dire Straits is close to being financed and produced. We already promised a finance with certain conditions, and it's very, very close. A half split of being produced. If you had a choice of a main character in that picture, who would that be?
It's not going to be me.
You told me that already. Yeah.
Well,
I mean, you had somebody in mind when you wrote the character as well.
Andy Garcia.
You had Andy Garcia, right?
Right, but now that was 19 years ago. Andy Garcia
got a bit older. Yeah, he got a bit
40. Now he's 60.
Right.
You know, so I don't know if Andy Garcia would be the right person for that role if it was done today. So I think Hollywood has a good selection of people out there that can do these roles and do them well. I think the important thing is that the main character is genuinely Spanish, not a non-Spanish trying to fake being Spanish.
And probably a Cuban, they have an accent.
Cuban. Yeah. You know, I was there in Miami when all the Cubans came over in 1960. That's a whole new story there. And I was even thinking about writing a book that had those characters in it that escaped Castro. There was so much of that story. And matter of fact, now that I'm talking about it, I think I just might do that. But they were really heroes, those Cubans. I was so impressed with their integrity and their drive, and I remember one time it was 1960, 61. I was a young cop in uniform, and I saw this guy dressed nicely, but he was selling bananas on the street corner, selling bananas. You know, he's walking up and down this where the intersections are, selling bananas. So he saw me. He said, "How are you, officer?" I said, "You from Cuba?" He said, "Oh yeah." I said, "What did you do when you were in Cuba? What kind of work did you do?" And he said, "I was a vice president of a bank." I said, "Wow." And I said, "Are you getting any help from the government here?" He says, "I don't want welfare. I know welfare." So he told me the story that he and two other families moved into a 2-bedroom apartment to live temporarily to get through the hard times. And I was so taken back in my admiration for that guy.
Well, as the outbringing, they have so much dignity.
Yeah. And of course, they have. It's not 2 generations ago, and maybe it's 3 generations, and kids, that's oblivious to them. You know, all their children and everything. But those groups of Cubans, and then the ones in the Mariel boat lift in 1980, May 17th of 1980. That also rings a lot of horror stories that came over, because in May, June, July, and August of 1980, we had more bodies floating up on the streets of Miami than any other city in the country. And Miami became the murder capital of the United States for 4 years because of Mariel boat lift.
Unbelievable.
By the way, Janet Reno was a pleasure to work with.
Call Me Mommy.
Yes, my wife's favorite book. Suzanne said that's
few words about that.
It's about a little boy. Well, it's about a woman, really, who's a mother and who gets tricked by her husband into losing custody of her son. And the son grew up to be a drug addict. Are we putting that together?
Very much, yeah.
Yeah. So it's all the story about crime and drugs and the want of a woman to be the mother because she wasn't allowed to be the mother. The father, he was a very important person in the city, and he would get his way all the time, that kind of thing. And he refused to let the mothers be the mother. So she had to sneak around to have time with her son. Her son didn't recognize her as mom. He was not allowed to call her mommy.
And the story unfolds.
Yeah.
The latent.
What really inspired that was for a while I was in charge of CSI, right? And I was always fascinated with real unusual cases of evidence. And there was a case in which, well, where was it? We had a true case in which we knew we could solve it if we could only get fingerprints off the skin where the girl was raped and she was touched all over her body, but that doesn't leave fingerprints. But I thought, well, I have three of my best technicians. I put them on a special squad to do studies on how to lift fingerprints on cadavers. And they found a way to do it. Okay.
That is amazing. I heard, just a small parenthesis, I don't want to interrupt you there.
Yeah.
Keep your thought. But in Europe, I heard in a comment on some crimes in there and all that, and they were admiring the way that they lift fingerprints, that the technology and all that probably came from you. But go ahead. Yeah.
Well, we did it with metal filings, not powder, metal filings. All right. And what we do is, you got to have the right circumstances. Maybe a girl who has smooth legs or smooth hands, smooth arms, and just dip that filings around the area you think she was touched. Then swing a magnet over the metal filings, and the ones that adhered to the skin left the fingerprint. We solved a triple murder in that method. I was very proud of that.
That's a book for someone to read immediately. Beyond the Call.
That was the McDuffie case turned fiction.
We spoke about the Upside to Murder, which is the next one to be a motion picture. Short stories for the thoughtful. Those are messages you send into, you probably your blog, probably something, right? Or it's just books, messages, short stories for the thoughtful.
Yeah.
Is that a book?
It is a book, but it's a book of 18 stories that are fiction, taken from true life, but they're fictionalized. And I've had
fictionalized because that's true, right? Okay, I got it.
And I just about 2 weeks ago, I was in a meeting, and a retired lieutenant from police department, who I wasn't necessarily a big friend of his, but he held up my book at the meeting and said, "I want you to know I read Marshall's book on short stories. It was wonderful." And it took me by surprise. I didn't expect that. But some of the stories are about music and violin, and some of them about a mother with cancer. So other things besides police, but most of them were like police stories. There were 18 stories. I guess I could take any one of them and enlarge the story, make it full-fledged. What do you call it? About novels about them. Do you have On My Father's Grave there?
You know what? I switched the page. I don't want to get there until the end. I kept that until the end, but yes, absolutely. If you want to talk about it now, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I want to leave that. I turned the page into the non-fiction, and I'm looking at a boy who married, of course, examining the roots of drug addiction. Oh, every time I get into that, it's just a tea break.
Yeah.
So you want to write a book? It's advice for the young people or for anyone attempting breaking into the
What
writing ed.
happened with that is I was getting involved in doing seminars and mostly library rooms on how to write a book, and I've noticed that everybody was always keep rapidly writing their notes. You know, the students would write their notes over and over. I realized I don't have any handouts for them about what they should know. I mean, this is so hard for them. So I decided to write a book, not a big book, but a book that gives you the basic answers to questions and how to do things. And I just called it, So You Want to Write a Book? And and now what I would do with them is I would tell the students when they came in the door, look, $10, buy the book. You won't have to take any notes because everything that I'm going to talk about is in the book.
Wonderful. Criminal injustice in America.
Yeah,
Essays by
it's just it's a hodgepodge of various. You and I have been talking about death penalty and drug use and things like that.
That's all in there.
It's all in there. Various aspects of the criminal justice system. What should be improved on.
There are two books, and I'm looking at them right here. Amerikastan.
Yeah.
Conquest From Within.
Yeah.
And you also have another one, Militant Islam in America.
Yes.
Those two are not attacking anyone, are just telling a true story of how it is and what we face today.
That's right.
They're not compromising. They're not attacking anyone. They're not against anybody. They're just observations and the facts that we face today, and the facts that some people don't realize they have before then.
Right.
Just a bit about those two. Let's start with Amerikastan.
They kind of follow each other. The Amerikastan is titled that mainly because there's a faction of Islam that is their objectives are to spread Islam throughout the entire world, not just the United States or Africa or whatever. You know, that it's their deep feeling is that Allah, according to the tenets of Islam, has said that Islam shall conquer the entire world. That is the goal. If it takes another 1,000 years, it takes another 1,000 years. They're in no hurry. And so there are people throughout Africa and Asia, Europe, North Africa, who are hell-bent on seeing this happen. I think there are many Muslims that are very happy just to be Muslims and live in Egypt or whatever, and don't concern themselves with this. But that doesn't really matter. What really matters are the people that are going to go forward with it. And you know, whether it's flying airplanes into our buildings or other methods by which you scare people to death, there's two major organizations in the world and worldwide that have said to America sometime over the last 50 years, we are going to conquer from within. Those terms, from within. And one is the Communist Party and the other is Islam. So my feeling is we have to keep an eye on this. This can come true. And I point out all the hypocrisies and the mess and mistakes that they've been making all over the years. And you know, but I think that Amerikastan probably is a very important book. You know, this whole I'm sure you're very much aware of the Iraqi what would be the word for it? They marched people from Iraqi Syria into Europe. The long train about 4 or 5 years ago at the end of Obama's reign, right? And millions of people went into Europe. And you know Europe better than I do for sure. And there are 57 other countries that are Islamic in this world. Little countries, big countries, whatever. Why Europe? Yeah. Europe doesn't speak their language. Europe doesn't have their methods of schooling and literacy and things like that. A million people from Syrian march into
It has
Europe.
to be. Here we get to, again. I think it's a they go there with permission. There's an agenda. You don't see the best people going there and all that. All the youngsters until about 28, 30. They're all men
Yes,
that are migrating.
right.
So it is an organized invasion.
Yes, it is.
Looks like it anyway. It's an
Yeah, but
organized invasion.
they're thinking of the future because
Because you don't see families. You don't see mothers and children with the whole family going to migrate and all that. And that will be a different story, different ages and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You see youngsters. You see an ocean of heads. And when you watch them in films, in documentaries coming in through, and I was watching the one that showed Del Sole, the Autostrada del Sole in Italy, the highway, the fantastic, the large highway they have, actually invaded by this jumping in front of cars and threatening and holding clubs and then to the streets. They took to the streets and the vandalism that was going on. What is this? This is not a peaceful Islam that we know about.
There's a motive behind it, and
there's a motive behind it. So someone is actually directing this. I wonder who the producer is.
I don't know.
And so those books are available in Amazon and also on Barnes & Noble.
They're available on Amazon. Yeah, and I've told people if they want to get a signed copy from me, they can just send me an email and a check for $15.
We're gonna leave links and everything. Absolutely.
Yeah, no problem.
I'm going back to fiction. What it says, fiction and On My Father's Grave.
Yeah. Oh, it's about a daughter who finds out that her mafia father is not really her father. Okay, he's a mobster. She tolerates him. She's a good gal, but she's had some rough times in the family. Family stuff very important. But she stumbles on a fact, and the fact is that her father is not her father, and she's of course angry at her mother for lying to her all these years. And then she starts demanding to know what happened to the father, and they tell her that your father is dead. That doesn't mean he's dead. They just told her that. So that's the premise of that whole story. Try not to get too detailed.
No, because we want that book, and I haven't read that book. I have to have it as well.
It's a small one.
From you, but
less word counts, 1,000 words.
Yeah, sometimes for all the kids out there, sometimes life is so unpredictable, and that's what happens to us when we're busy doing other things, as Mr. John Lennon used to say. I think we covered most of it, but not enough. We still need a one more meeting, maybe one of these days when you're free. You'll come back again, and we can talk about in depth of certain other things that you'll probably feel comfortable with. And I thank you very much for accepting this interview, Marshall. It's been a great pleasure, and I'm looking forward to seeing you next time.
So I thank you for being my friend.